He's a Ugandan pop star risking death by returning home. What will this musician turned politician accomplish by flying back to Kampala? I'm Imran Garta, and today's newsmaker is Bobi Wine. Broken, bruised, and too weak to stand. Just weeks ago, Bobi Wine was flown to the United States for medical treatment after allegedly being tortured by Ugandan security forces. But he returned home last week at the risk of prosecution. Wine faces charges of treason after campaigning in last month's by-election. If found guilty, he could face the death penalty. The pop star first captured the imagination of Uganda's youth with songs about corruption, poverty and democracy. But entering the political fray has rocked the political establishment. Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni has been in power for almost as long as Bobi Wine has been alive. And he has no plans to stand down, especially not for the 36-year-old singer. So, what is Bobi Wine's plan? I'll ask him in a few minutes when he joins me on the program. But first, we begin with this report by Hariri.
Songs of freedom. For years, Bobi Wine has been singing about injustice in Uganda and captured the attention of its young people. But now it's less for his music and more for his politics.
Ugandans have always been wanting freedom. They've always been wanting to be the masters of their destiny. They've always wanted to live in a country where leaders are servants and the people are the true masters. And that is what we still advocate for. We advocate for people power.
Wine, whose real name is Robert Chagulani, is seen as the biggest political challenger to President Yoweri Museveni. He emerged last year after winning a parliamentary by-election, and Wine's message quickly became popular. He's been outspoken on corruption, unemployment and government repression. 3/4 of Uganda's population is under 30, and at 74 years old, Museveni is accused of being out of touch with its youth. Many of them weren't even born when Museveni came to power in 1986. But Wine's star nearly burned out last month. He was arrested and charged with treason for allegedly throwing stones at the president's convoy. Appearing in court days later, Wine says he was tortured. This led to violent protests on the streets of the capital, Kampala. The government denies Wine was beaten while in custody. After being granted bail, he flew to the United States for medical treatment. Wine returned to Uganda last week to cheering crowds. But he's still charged with treason, and if convicted, faces the death penalty.
Right now we are actually slaves in our own country. We cannot speak freely. We cannot even wave to each other freely.
So are the charges against Bobi Wine politically motivated? And how will President Museveni handle the challenge posed by Wine and his supporters? Hariri, the Newsmakers.
Well, Bobi Wine joins me now from Kampala. Good to have you on the program, sir. There were mixed reports as to whether you were arrested or escorted when you returned. And even when it came to your torture, the government said, actually, you weren't tortured before you went to the United States. Just for the sake of absolute clarity, the government still says you weren't tortured. Tell me why you think they're wrong.
Well, the government of Uganda should actually be ashamed itself because in the first place, I was arrested, tortured, and then when I was paraded in the military court, the government presented 2 machine guns and claimed that they were found on me. But later on, the government, without giving any justification, dropped the charges. And personally, I had wounds, and not only me, but the Honorable Zake continues to be in a terrible state in a hospital in India, following the same day fracas. Many other people continue to ail in hospital. So it is shameful for the government to say that it can torture its people and then later on come out to deny them.
Right. Treason, a hell of a charge. Tell me what that means. Does that mean that Museveni is threatened by you?
Well, the government, the regime, President Museveni's regime, has always brought up brutal violence against anybody that challenges his authoritative rule. But this time it was too much because even on the way I returned on the airport, I was brutally arrested. And again, Entebbe town and the whole of Kampala city was like a war zone. It is evident that the regime is very scared of people coming together. And now they're doing anything else to cause fear. The fear is not against me. The fear is against the people of Uganda coming together.
How big is your movement?
Well, it is people power. First of all, it is not my movement. It's not about me. It is all the people of Uganda, all the oppressed people of Uganda. So it is very big because it goes across all political parties. We have people that support us, even from regime, from within the ruling party, and yes, from within the regime itself. So everybody is people power in Uganda for as long as they fall on the side of the oppressed.
Watching previous interviews of yours, you refer to yourself as a ghetto president. Tell me what that means. What is a ghetto president?
Well, I grew up from the ghetto. I made all my, lived all my youthful life in the ghetto. But still, when I was in the ghetto, I always tried to come up with the ideas that liberate ourselves, especially mentally. And that is when they nicknamed me Ghetto President.
I'm looking at Museveni's career. He's 74 years old. He will run for a 6th term in 2021. He's been in power since 1986. When you and I are the same age, that's when you and I were little children. And you want to take on this man. What makes you so confident that you'll win?
What makes me feel confident that we will win as the people of Uganda, because the majority of the people of Uganda are young people like myself. 80% of the population in Uganda has never seen another president in their lifetime. 85% of the population of Uganda is younger than me, is under 35 years of age. So these people understand when I tell them. They understand the problem we are faced with. They do not know any differences drawn by religion, by political parties, or by economic class. We all find ourselves with the same predicament, the unemployment, the exclusion, and all the injustices that we continue to face all as people of Uganda. So I believe that because we are so many people that find ourselves sharing the same plight, we shall rise to the occasion and liberate ourselves.
You've got a taste of being in opposition right now as an independent, and you've got a fairly brutal taste of it. You've been beaten up. I have no reason to suspect that you're not telling the truth in terms of your torture and the harassment of some of your colleagues. You faced brutality, and maybe that's just a taste of some more brutality to come. Does that deter you at all?
I am not excited to know that the government intends to unleash brutality on me and many other people that think like me. But again, I am more scared of living like a slave in my own country. I am more scared of getting tough questions from my children and my grandchildren asking me what I did when the nation was going astray. So I'm more convinced that if I join others and do something about it, we can make use of the opportunity that we have to steer our country to the right path, the country that we will be proud of in the future.
Yeah, Bobby, I was watching some local Ugandan TV. I was watching an NTV discussion about you. It was an hour-and-a-half long discussion about you, and they had an NRM representative on there. And one of the points that she made was, there's a democratic system in Uganda. There's a parliament. You're a member of parliament. Why are you taking your issues to the streets? Why don't you bring them up in parliament? Does she have a point?
I did not take any issue to the street. I was attending a supposedly democratic process. That was a by-election in Arua. And the guards of the president attacked me. They shot my driver dead. They beat me and beat many other members of parliament and different colleagues. And they incarcerated us. They charged us for trumped-up cases like possession of ammunition and the like. Today we are facing a treason charge. So the government of Uganda pretends to be democratic, but it is brutal, it is brutalizing its citizens, and that is something we refuse to accept. So we are not going to the streets. We are not causes of violence. The government is what is unleashing violence on the innocent civilians.
Is the treason charge hanging over you like an axe? Do you need it to go away before you can move forward?
Well, with or without the treason charge, I will move forward. It is not the first time I am wrongfully charged before a court. So, with or without a charge, I will not be deterred. My resolve is that I will get my freedom or die trying.
Bobi Wine, I thank you very much for taking the time to join us here on the Newsmakers. Coming up on the program, alarming new allegations against South Sudan's army. Are civilians being systematically tortured, raped and murdered? And who killed Lebanese Prime Minister Rafik Hariri? We'll discuss the upcoming ruling by a UN-backed tribunal. South Sudan's army is being accused of having free rein to murder, rape and loot in the central state of Unity. Amnesty International made the allegations in a new report. The group interviewed civilians fleeing the violence from military operations that began in April and continued despite the most recent ceasefire in June. A civil war broke out in South Sudan 5 years ago, and Amnesty says war crimes are all too common because the government doesn't prosecute the perpetrators. Well, joining me now from our London studio is the co-author of the Amnesty International report, Joanne Mariner. Joanne, good to have you on the Newsmakers. We're going to have a representative of the South Sudanese government in a few moments, so I guess it's my job to get as much clarity out of you as possible before I pose some of these extraordinary allegations to him. How certain can we be that all this torture and rape and killings took place?
I think we are very certain. I mean, sadly, we received multiple, consistent, overlapping testimonies, many referring to the same event, so we would hear about the same event from multiple sources. We interviewed, for this report, 100 displaced people who came from dozens of villages, who described dozens of incidents. There was a similar report by the UN that was based on an even larger number of testimonies. And probably, I guess, most compelling of all, this is one of many offenses over the past several years where we've seen the same kinds of acts of violence been carried out, the same kinds of atrocities. And in fact, Amnesty International sent a letter to the South Sudanese government in 2016 naming some of the people that we believed were responsible for the atrocities in Southern Unity State at that period. We never received a response. Now, with this latest offensive, we find that some of those same people are implicated in the atrocities. So I think when you speak to the South Sudanese government representative, it would be very good to ask him about the question of impunity, of lack of accountability.
Certainly, and I will. Is it absolutely clear to you that government soldiers deliberately targeted civilians?
Yes, we have multiple overlapping accounts of a pattern by which government soldiers with allied youth militia deliberately attacked civilian villages. They burned down civilian houses. They chased civilians into the swamp, deliberately targeting them. And we have eyewitness accounts from people who saw, for example, their husbands killed right in front of them, other relatives killed right in front of them. They also burned many of the houses that included old people and disabled people who were unable to flee. So, you know, there was quite a heavy civilian toll in this last offensive, and I think it can be directly attributed to the government.
It's a civil war, and many will look at it and say, well, everybody's killing everybody. What's the ratio of blame in this latest spate of violence when we look at whether it's the government forces or Machar's forces? Who's doing most of the killing?
I mean, certainly in the past, Machar's forces have equally been responsible for serious atrocities, including massacres. This offensive, however, was a government offensive. So the government was seeking to essentially clear out the population from rebel-controlled areas. So they were attacking the villages. they seem to conflate the civilian population with the opposition. So they treated everyone as if they were a member of the opposition, even children, even women, even pregnant women. So, I mean, in this case, it's certainly government forces that were responsible for the violations.
Were these war crimes?
These were war crimes. These were also crimes against humanity.
And when we look at some of the complexities of it, was the killing done along ethnic lines at all?
Many, or probably even most of the government forces were Dinka, and many people, you know, they were carrying out rape that seemed to be ethnically motivated. However, they were also assisted by youth militia from Unity State who were members of the same ethnic group as the victims, who were Nuer. So there was an ethnic element, but there was also a very strong political element. It was, do you support the government or not? And the victims were people who were perceived as not supportive of the government.
So far, the government has rejected your report. So before I bring in Ateni Wek-Ateni from the government, very directly, what's your message to them with regards to your report and moving forward?
I think these reports of atrocities based on field research and eyewitness testimony have been too frequent for the government to simply dismiss. I think the government needs to sign the Memorandum of Understanding to create the hybrid court that it promised to create 3 years ago, and it needs to take real steps towards establishing accountability for these serious violations.
Joanne Mariner from Amnesty International joining us from London. Thank you very much. Let's open up the discussion to our panel now. Joining me now in Juba is Ateni Wek. He's the press secretary for South Sudanese President Salva Kiir. In Addis Ababa is Clem Ryan, former coordinator of the UN Security Council panel of experts on South Sudan. And finally, Brian Adeba is in Washington, D.C. He's the deputy director of policy for the Enough Project, an initiative aimed at countering genocide and crimes against humanity in Africa. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us. Ateni Wek-Ateni, let me begin with you. We just spoke with Amnesty International. They say rape, hanging from trees, running over people with armored vehicles, little boys and girls being gang raped, 90-year-olds being burnt alive in their tukals, their homes. Amnesty International says these are war crimes and crimes against humanity, and they've been conducted by your forces, South Sudanese forces. Your response to that is what?
I think this is a continued polarization of the country and the army, given that the report did not allude to when and how these crimes were actually committed. There was no fighting that has taken place in those places that are mentioned in the report. And therefore, if there is no fighting that has taken place, the whole report looked like a make-up report.
So those 100 displaced people that they interviewed, sir, those 100 displaced people that they interviewed, they cross-referenced the stories. They all independently spoke about the same things. Who made it up, Amnesty or the displaced people?
Well, first of all, if you approach displaced people, they will be actually talking to you about, polarizing government. And this is what exactly has happened. And this is not the first time that the Amnesty International has cut and faced the same report time and again. When in actual fact, if Amnesty International is actually serious, then they should look at the reason why certain crimes happen by certain individual, and that is because there was fighting in the country. Now the country is looking, for the way out. That's why the peace agreement was signed, and now it is the beginning of the implementation of the peace agreement.
Okay, so let me bring in
the
Brian
revitalized peace agreement, which
will
bring an end to the
Yes, everybody wants it to end, but if there are crimes being committed, there are crimes being committed. Brian Adeba, what's more likely? That Amnesty International has made all of this up, or that the presidential spokesman, Mr. Ateni Wek-Ateni, is in denial of obvious facts?
Thank you. I think Mr. Ateni Wek-Ateni is in denial of the fact that this government the government forces are responsible for egregious acts of human rights abuses in South Sudan since this war started. This is not a new phenomenon. This has been ongoing since 2013. Various human rights organizations have reported the same scenario. Surely they can't just be making up stories for the sake of it. And the evidence is all around. When you speak to people from South Sudan, that evidence is there. It's also been documented, not only by these international human rights organizations, but local people are documenting it. There's a whole, there are a number of stories coming out from people who have lived these experiences. So to deny the obvious is, to say the least, quite ridiculous, really. I mean, the government really has to acknowledge its role in this, and that, of course, means acknowledging the breakdown of discipline and order within the SPLA. Mm-hmm. The SPLA training ethos has deteriorated completely. There was a reform process to professionalize the SPLA in 2012. That process itself has been stymied with the onset of the war. And you have a behavior that can be described as the behavior of brigands in the SPLA. And the majority of the SPLA soldiers are like that. Okay. And it's not a new thing, actually.
So, Ateliwek, I'm going to give you a chance to respond, but let me bring in Clem Ryan for the moment. Clem Ryan, when you read the Amnesty report, your immediate reaction was what?
That we've read this and seen these actions consistently over the last 4.5 years. Around the country. The report is entirely credible. There is ample forensic evidence to back it up. The report even mentions some of the elements that women who have been raped, MSF clinics. MSF does not make up allegations about these kind of things. Mm-hmm. Unmissed person around reported the same things. Humanitarian organisations were actually withdrawn during the fighting. I find the presidential spokesperson's position extraordinary, because basically he seems to be the only person I've encountered in South Sudan who actually doesn't believe that this actually occurred. I was in Juba during the period when this fighting was going on in the United States. I spoke with some of the most senior members of the government. They admitted fully that this fighting was occurring, had different stories about who was involved and why, but they certainly didn't deny that it was occurring. So this is a new position from the government.
Ateliwek, why the denial? The odds seem to be stacked against you. What's wrong with admitting, okay, some terrible things must be happening and we need to sort it out? The evidence seems to be overwhelming.
No, first of all, I'm not in denial. But Brian Adiba is the one that is denying, simply because he referred to the SPLA as brigand. For South Sudanese to refer to the SPLA that liberated this country as brigand is quite unfortunate. This country was not given by Amnesty International. It was fought for by the people of South Sudan. It's not a free of charge. Brian Adiba, you live in Washington, D.C., and you think that the SPLM or the SPLA has just, turned into a brigand overnight.
Okay, but
sir, does that mean that
it is the same does that mean because
to come to the
because
point,
you fought for the liberation? Sorry to interrupt you. Does that mean that because you fought for the liberation? Because you fought for the liberation of the country, does that make you immune from criticism? Does that mean that anything that happens after that cannot necessarily mean that anybody, especially South Sudanese, can criticize you because you fought for the liberation of the country?
No, that is not the case, my friend. The case is this. In any situation, in any war situation, some individuals may take law into their own hand. I've been saying this time and again. That has never been this policy of any government in the world. All the government in the world, including that of South Sudan, have the obligation to protect the civilians. And at time of war, civilians can run into the risk of the crossfire. And that is always counted as an isolated incident.
You talk about running into the risk of crossfire, right? Now, when people are raped, when people are hanged from trees, when they're run over with armored vehicles, when little boys and girls are gang raped, when people as old as 90, I mention again, are burnt alive in their homes, that's not crossfire. That's not two armies fighting against each other and civilians caught in the middle. That's people who are deliberately targeted. it would take an enormous creativity to invent these stories. So again, what's more likely, that Amnesty's made all this stuff up, or that you have a serious problem that you need to look at, and you owe it to your people to look at it seriously rather than just rejecting and denying everything?
No, I'm not denying. The truth of the matter is that whenever there is a situation whereby an individual has taken law into his or her own hand, the government of South Sudan has been always there to make sure that it brings that person who have taken law into his own or her own hand into book. And the example is the tearing, where the 10 soldiers who actually gang raped foreign aid workers. And at the time when there was fighting in Juba on the wake of July 8th incident in Juba,
right.
Those people were now locked up,
okay.
for
so
life.
Let me take that. Let me pose that to Brian. Okay.
And some are going for 15 years.
Okay, so Brian, we
are not there to allow anybody to do anything.
We talk about accountability. Really. Amnesty said no accountability and there's complete impunity, right? Brian, Ateni says, well, hold on. Yep. 10 soldiers went to prison for raping foreign aid workers and murdering a local journalist. So there is accountability. What do you think, Brian?
Yeah, I think, first of all, let me just say that holding the perpetrators of the Terrain Hotel incident accountable is a positive step. However, I must note that this happened after immense international pressure. The government was very reluctant to go ahead and prosecute those who committed those atrocities. In the light of these reports that are coming out frequently from the UN, from Amnesty International, from Human Rights Watch, from local residents about egregious human rights abuses, I think it is time that the government also replicates what it did at the Terrain Hotel with the Terrain Hotel perpetrators and hold those people accountable. Secondly, I think that the international community, in light of these reports that are coming out frequently, the international community has to play its role by enacting consequences on the perpetrators of this violence. One of the things that can be done is to enact pressures, financial pressures, targeted on individuals who are complicit, individuals who have command and control. Targeted sanctions on these people to ensure that there are consequences for their impunity, that they don't move their money around, that they don't travel, that they don't continue to perpetuate this violence. And then the other thing to do is actually to ensure that there's an arms embargo on the country, an arms embargo that is enforceable, and that means asking the neighboring nations and the neighboring states to actually play their role in enforcing these sanctions, right, so that the impunity that is ongoing in South Sudan, the people behind it are held accountable.
Clem Ryan, what do you think? How do you stop the violence and who gets to enforce it?
There is absolute impunity in South Sudan. That's been well documented. The terrain events aside, which is a very particular case, talking about 10 low-ranking soldiers against the backdrop of a war in which you have millions of people forced from their homes, hundreds of thousands have likely died in the last 4 years. And the presidential spokesman would have you suggest that the terrain example is their paradigm of accountability. If you look, when they replaced the Chief of General Staff for the SPLA recently, they promoted Jock Riak, who is under UN sanctions for committing or leading operations which involved similar atrocities as those that have just been documented in Unity State. So we see the same thing time and again. And as the Amnesty representative accurately pointed out, the individuals who committed these atrocities in 2018 were also suspected of involvement in atrocities in 2014 and 2015. There is no accountability in South Sudan for these things.
Ateni Wek, very finally, can we trust that you are committed to peace?
Yes, for sure. We are committed for peace. That's why we sign it, and we have the political will to implement it. But to come back to the point, Brian Adiba is an activist, and there's no time an activist has stopped criticizing government. Even the superpower like United States of America still has an activist that are criticizing it. They wanted a country to be perfect. But the Tehran case was not influenced politically. This is the work of the court that can be commanded. the government of South Sudan has a political will to bring to book those who commit crimes against humanity when they are found. It has never been a policy of government to let people go away with impunity. The government of South Sudan has the ability and will to make sure that it brings to book those who have committed crimes against humanity. But it cannot be done in the way those activists like Brian Adiba would want to see it happening. If it is those of Brian Adiba and his Enough project, they want to see the South Sudan taking people in mass into imprisonment, so that they become happy that the accountability has started. If the accountability started the way it has started, as now we see 10 soldiers who have taken law into their own hand being locked up, this is something that should be actually appreciated and in the right direction.
Okay, Ateni and Brian, unfortunately,
yes,
I've got to wrap. I'd love to have both of you on the program again to address some of these issues. There's a lot to talk about. We're not going to take our attention off South Sudan. I can guarantee that. Clem Ryan, Brian Adeba, Ateni Wakateni, and earlier Joanne Mariner, I thank you all for joining us on the Newsmakers. Who killed former Lebanese Prime Minister Rafik Hariri is the question a UN-backed tribunal has been trying to answer since 2005. The special court is due to wrap up proceedings against 4 members of Hezbollah, but the verdict is not likely to change the court of public opinion. Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah has dismissed the tribunal as a US-Israeli plot, refusing to turn the suspects over to authorities. Meanwhile, many of Hariri's supporters have insisted that Hezbollah was behind the assassination the whole time. So, can justice be served? Shoaib Hassan has more.
It's an event that's seared into Lebanon's recent political history. The assassination of former Prime Minister Rafik Hariri, father of the country's current Prime Minister Saad al-Hariri, continues to cast its shadow over the country.
The targeting of a political figure of such eminence and stature, the terrifying degree of devastation and physical destruction, and the sheer magnitude of the explosion in the middle of Beirut, in the middle of the day, was calculated to send a message of terror.
Powers made the remarks as part of the final arguments at the UN-backed special tribunal set up to investigate the incident and prosecute those involved. Among those attending was Saad al-Hariri, who had spoken earlier in the trial.
And unfortunately, the names of those who perpetrated these crimes are Lebanese. They follow a certain political party. They are innocent until proven guilty. This is what we want, justice, not vengeance. We never seek vengeance. And hopefully, by the end of this trial, we will find out the truth and we will get the justice that we call for in Lebanon.
The political party is the Shia political militia group, Hezbollah. Some of its members are alleged to have carried out the 2005 bombing, which left another 21 people dead. It was said to be a bid to ensure that Syria's hold on Lebanon remained in place, something that Hariri had fought against. At the time, Damascus had several thousand troops stationed in the country, as well as an embedded intelligence operation. That was in addition to its close ties and support of Hezbollah. But the assassination of Hariri backfired. It triggered what was called the Cedar Revolution in 2005, a series of demonstrations against Syria's interference in the country and the presence of its troops. The movement forced it to call back all forces from Lebanon and led to a decline of Syrian influence across the political spectrum. It's led to a much less militarized Lebanon, although Hezbollah has kept its arsenal intact. But it's restrained itself from using its military muscle within the country. The trial continues to divide public opinion in Lebanon and sour relations between the various factions. The UN tribunal has long since established that 4 Hezbollah operatives allegedly carried out the attack. That's something the group has strongly denied and even walked out of the government over the issue in the past. Some say that the trial is necessary to ensure the rule of law is fully established in the country. So, will the verdict have a positive effect on Lebanon? Or will it create more tensions in a region transformed by the Syrian war? Shoaib Hassan, the Newsmakers.
Let's bring in our panel from Beirut. Kazim Khair is a former politician with Said Hariri's Future Movement. Omar Nashabeh is a professor at Lebanon University and served as a consultant on the Special Tribunal on Lebanon. And Karma Khayat is the vice chairwoman of Al Jadid TV and faced the tribunal herself for reporting about the prosecution's witnesses. I thank you all for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Kazim Khair, let me begin with you. So nobody's in the dock. We have 4 Hezbollah defendants still on the run. Has the UN tribunal been worth all the effort and worth all the trouble?
Before we start with the question, I just want to clear something. I'm an independent politician. I'm not pro any party. Regarding the STL, we have today 4 accused, and from an objective opinion, I believe that most Lebanese are waiting for the final convict, which is going to be held in 2019. We have witnessed in Lebanon since independence and even before independence dozens of political assassinations, starting from Fouad Jumblat to Riyad Solh, Maruf Saad, Bashir Jmail, and Tony Frangiyi, going to Rashid Karami and Mufti Hassan Khalid, Abbas al-Musawi, and others, till we reached the series of assassinations of 14th of March movement, which was had started with former Prime Minister Rafik Hariri. So today, we think that the only way to stop the interference of the political assassinations in the life of politics in Lebanon, in the democratic system we have, and the freedom of speech, is to have justice and to have the truth about all assassinations that happen. And it would be a barrier that will stop all ideas of deleting other political parties through political assassinations.
Right, okay. Karma Khayat, when that decision does come, as we expect it in 2019, so things are wrapped up and they're going to deliberate. When that decision does come, is there going to be justice, not only for Rafik Hariri and the others killed in that terrible bombing, but also for the Lebanese people?
I have a different perception on the issue. Justice is needed, definitely, but it's even needed more in our country. So instead of, I don't believe that it's going to change the political landscape. I don't believe that the tribunal has not gone through a lot of mishaps, and maybe one of the main mishaps is that I'm a journalist and I'm the only accused to ever walk into the tribunal, other than the fact of the many different lacks of evidence that the prosecution had, and the fact that what we are seeing today from the tribunal are things that, at least I can say that on Al Jadid, have been aired maybe 4 years ago. So many of the evidence that, or most of the evidence, are evidence known to everyone. I would say definitely everyone wants to put a stop to the political assassinations, and I don't believe it's the tribunal that actually led to that. We've spent like $1 billion on this tribunal. Maybe Lebanon has spent 500 million of it, and this could have been spent in our justice system, in the judicial system in the country, to better Lebanon in actually acting upon justice issues. So we have bigger problems in the country, and we should be spending this money in areas allocated to the Lebanese, where the Lebanese people would actually benefit from it judicially and in relation to our sovereignty.
Right. Karma, just for the sake of clarity, what was your trouble with the tribunal, and where does that stand right now? We won. We were acquitted. We won the case.
the tribunal at a point in Lebanon was acting in an extremely superior manner to the Lebanese people and to the media. So they decided to file a lawsuit against Al Jadid and myself. We were accused, and my accusation would have reached up to 7 years of prison for investigative stories that we have done related to the tribunal, from which many of the defense today is using or is referring to lots of it. So Al Jadid is a pioneer in investigative journalism, and we had done several investigative pieces related to the UNIIC, and following that related to the International Tribunal, to the STL. So one of the stories they indicted us had to do with witnesses that had given statements to the tribunal, of which we had not even aired their faces nor their names. So anyway, we fought the battle. It was of course an unfair battle to strong-arm the media in the country, of which the tribunal definitely lost. Right. And we were acquitted in the end. So as an accused, I was the only one to step into the tribunal.
Yeah, that's
all
an
the
interesting
other
point.
accused do not actually exist.
Yeah, the four Hezbollah defendants still on the run, and this is all going on without anybody actually in the dock. Omar, when that decision comes, will there be justice, or has Lebanon already, as has been suggested, moved on politically from the fallout, because that was a different time almost a decade and a half ago?
Well, justice has no age or limit. It doesn't expire. We actually have to have justice. We need justice. It's a crucial need. And whoever committed these crimes and assassinated Mr. Hariri or others has to be brought to justice. There's no doubt about that. The problem is the division in Lebanon is about how to reach justice. And is the tribunal, is the Special Tribunal for Lebanon the right organization, the right construct, the right body? It's a special body. It's a very special body, in fact. And it didn't receive consensus among the Lebanese. I disagree with your guest that not all the Lebanese are waiting for his justice. Many of the Lebanese have disregarded it entirely, completely, even if they are pro-Hariri. They have, and your guest actually mentioned a few names, and he, I'm sure by mistake, he missed out President René Mawad, who was assassinated also, and also Prime Minister Rashid Karami. And Prime Minister Rashid Karami, there was a court, a Lebanese higher court, that found the guilty people who actually assassinated him. But on the same year that Mr. Rafik Hariri was assassinated, the parliament decided to issue a law of amnesty for the person who was found guilty of assassinating a sitting prime minister. That was 2005. So it's a contradiction. It's a big contradiction. And there are divisions in Lebanon. That is not new. Now, this tribunal and the process that it followed, I followed it very closely, and I was a former consultant for the defense team from 2012 until this year. So I know this tribunal very well. I gave a few lectures in the London School of Economics about it also. I have there are, you know, first of all, the problem is that there's no consensus in Lebanon. So there's a division. If you want to bring a referee or someone who is supposed to play the person who represents justice,
allow me to come in, and I know there's a slight delay.
Both parties have to agree to. Yes.
Allow me to come in, and I know there's a slight delay, right? Let's just step back for a second. You say there's no consensus, but there was enough consensus at the time or in the immediate aftermath for tens of thousands to take to the streets to protest against the Syrian presence in the country, which eventually got Syrian troops to leave the country after 3 decades, right? So, though you might disagree, there was enough consensus to believe that the Syrians were picking off Lebanese politicians for years and that they needed to put an end to that. And I'm guessing that's where Kazam is coming from as well. And that was a different time. Things have changed now, but it was still most likely to be the Syrians with the likes of Hezbollah helping them.
That's
Would
a
you
problem.
accept that?
Yeah, that's, sir, yes. With your question, there's a problem because, you know, your question, answering your question would mean that I would actually be lenient with the violation of the presumption of innocence. When someone is killed, you shouldn't actually, when you ask for a tribunal and you ask for justice, you should wait for the verdict. The verdict is yet not out. So how can people actually, you know, have a tunnel vision? Do you know who killed the man and you need a tribunal to confirm it for you? That's a different process. That's not the justice due process. A due process, you have to wait for the different steps. And during the first early stages, this tribunal works. What is the evidence presented? It is the analysis of telecom traffic, not even telecom content. one. Two, there are so many practices by the prosecutor's office that are not only unprofessional but also unethical. You don't look for the killer of Mr. Hariri in a gynecology clinic in the southern suburb of Beirut without having a representative of the Medical Bar Association and the Ministry of Health. That's what is the prosecutors, investigators did. They acted in ways that were so violating basic fundamental human rights.
You have big question marks about the investigation and the tribunal. Kazam Khair, come in.
Actually, I think that the cabinet in Lebanon has been paying for the tribunal for years. And now we're at the end of this. We are waiting for, in 2019, for the final convict. And based on that, we believe that all the Lebanese want the political assassinations to stop in Lebanon. And I named some of the assassinations. I didn't go into all. We have dozens and dozens. And people also who survived bombing attempts, who are also on the list of been under assassination. So the issue is that we haven't reached the truth or justice for years. And for the political life in Lebanon to go on, especially that Lebanon is one of the few countries in the area which has a democratic system. I mean, we still have presidents who are ex-presidents and still alive, which is where you can find it very few in other countries in the Arab world or in the area. This system is what we really are holding on, and it shouldn't be interfered with the assassinations or to make people silent regarding their rights, or politicians silent regarding their positions. So we feel that if we reach a truth one time, with this issue, with this case, then we can put a barrier to all kind of interference of political assassinations in Lebanon for the future. I don't believe that we were able to reach the truth in any of the assassinations that was done before. I agree with Omar that we don't have a consensus on the tribunal in Lebanon, and it's well known. We have a lot of parties in Lebanon. We have pro and we have against, and we have people who don't even mind it. But I believe that all people in Lebanon are waiting for the truth because of the number of assassinations that was done in Lebanon since independence till today.
Okay, so then let me finally ask Karma. And I don't want Omar to accuse me of taking sides in the tribunal here, so I'm gonna ask this very carefully. I'm going to use my words very carefully when I ask you this question, Karma. With the verdict, when it comes out, will it lessen the chances of Lebanon being used as a geopolitical playground for larger powers? Because if there is any consensus in Lebanon, it's that this small country has been used as a playground for the battles of bigger powers. Will that lessen after the verdict?
Of course it will not. I mean, it would be a dream come true if it does. It would be a dream if all the political assassinations in the country stop, or no one ever dares to do that again. It would also be a dream to get justice to the over 1,000 innocent people that were killed by the Israelis in the July war for Lebanon. But I truly do not believe that the political justice, we will reach political justice, or Lebanon will stop becoming a ground for all the external parties to interfere. I would just like to add one thing. You were saying that it put a stop to Syria. Syria was accused. The tribunal did not accuse Syria. If the other party is looking for justice in this manner, Syria is not accused in the STL. There are 4 individuals that were accused, and the indictment and the verdict will come based on those 4 individuals that were accused. Syria is not,
I was referring to the street demonstrations which led to the withdrawal of the Syrian forces. In the immediate aftermath, the street demonstrations which led to the withdrawal of the Syrian forces.
No, I know, but I know, but I'm just making a point that even the special tribunal of Lebanon went into a more individual basis. So
Understood.
I do not believe that the verdict, I just believe that we're going to be spending more and more money. I agree with Omar that the Lebanese people from all different parties, and even our Prime Minister, Saad al-Hariri, went out after the tribunal and said that whatever the verdict is, we will have to live together and work together, all the different parties in Lebanon. So in the end, politics is politics. Politics will continue to evolve in Lebanon based on the different parties. I don't think that Special Tribunal of Lebanon will either put a stop to the assassinations in the country, will bring actual justice, which we all dream of, okay? And the most important part is we would be benefiting our country if we would be spending those money. The tribunal is going to go further for another 9 years.
Right.
There are other cases related to the assassination of Rafik al-Hariri, and the employees in the tribunal will continue to be paid their salary, so they have a benefit in proceeding with the tribunal. So we'll be paying another 9 years, which would be another $1 billion. I'm sure our justice system in Lebanon truly needs this kind of money.
The one thing that annoyed me is that we invited the STL spokesperson to come onto the program, and we almost got the spokesperson on. Unfortunately, we couldn't get that guaranteed. That would have been good to have a bit of that back and forth. We will no doubt invite you all back on the program again at some point. Karma Khayat, Omar Nashabi, and Kazam Khair. I've got to move on for now, but I thank you very much for joining us. That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. You can check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe. Next time, millions of Yemeni children are at risk of starving to death as fighting intensifies in Hodeidah. Is hunger being used as a weapon of this war? Until then, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.